reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee, but he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all, and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
This year in our parish, we've had something of a baby boom. About 8 or 9 active families have all had a new little baby, boy or girl. I don't know if it's been the cold winters or what has produced all of this baby making, but it is certainly noticeable, especially on a Sunday morning when you're trying to preach through all those children crying at once. The presence of children brings joy to our hearts and brings hope to us. The presence of children means that we have a future as a parish, a future in our community. Earlier this week, I was in a coffee shop and I was thinking about this homily. And a family came in, a mother and father and a little girl. They came in and sat down at the table next to me. And the 2 adults immediately began to argue with each other. In fact, they were having some sort of relationship issue, and they were airing it out for the whole coffee shop to hear. They were using some bad language. I almost got up and left. It was so annoying. But the little 3-year-old girl who was with them seemed quite unconcerned by this. There she was in a cute little pink Hello Kitty outfit. She had a hat twisted to one side, and she kept twirling and dancing around the coffee shop, kept coming up and saying hi to me. The presence of a child brought a lot of peace and calm to what was otherwise a rather tense situation. Maybe this is why the Bible is so clear, that children are always a blessing from the Lord. Truly, sons are a gift from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a blessing. In preparation for his trip to the United States this week, Pope Francis was on the ABC show 2020 for a town hall type event. You might have seen it. And people from all over the United States were asking him questions. And there was one young woman from Los Angeles who was asking him a question. And she was a single mother. She had her 2 children there. She was very cute. But she talked about how difficult it was as a single mother to raise her children by herself, and how often people would look askance at her or judge her rather than help her. Now, perhaps it's easy to judge a person in a situation like that, but Pope Francis, who so beautifully exhibits Christian love, which judges no one, simply began to congratulate the woman, thanked her for all the hard work she did for her children, thanked her for choosing life for them and bringing these blessings into this world. And it was so beautiful to see how this woman began to weep, so clearly moved by the Pope's loving words. The blessing of children was further affirmed by a study that came out this week about how family size affects parents' happiness. The author of this study, before she began, assumed that parents with less children would be happier. After all, with less children, you have less stress and less expenses. But her findings proved the exact opposite. That it was parents who chose to have more children that were happy. The joy of having children in the home, the way in which children with many brothers and sisters learn independence and social skills, far outweighed these other factors. Indeed, for many parents, the inability to conceive or to have as many children as they would like is a real suffering. And parents in this situation can be generous in other ways. Many parents are generous by adopting children. Many parents are generous by living lives of service that make a real difference in other someone who chooses a celibate vocation, I have many spiritual children. And just like real children, they can be a headache, but they're always a joy. So parents, be generous however you can. Be generous with the number of children you have. Be generous with the time and love that you give them. A group of expectant fathers were in the hospital waiting room as their wives were down the hall in the process of giving birth. And a nurse came in and went up to one of the men and said, "Congratulations, you're a father. Your wife just gave birth to a healthy set of twins." "That's quite a coincidence," the man said. "I play for the Minnesota Twins." A few minutes later, another nurse came in and went up to another man and said, "Congratulations, your wife just gave birth to triplets." "That's amazing," the man said. "I work for the 3M company." Well, just then a third man fell off his chair and fainted onto the floor. And all the nurses ran over to go help him to see what was the matter. And as they helped him up, he said, No, I'm okay. It's just that I work for the 7-Up company." We need to see children. This is why Jesus thrusts a child into the midst of the disciples as they are arguing with each other about who is the greatest. The presence of a child brings peace and calm to what was until then a rather tense situation. At the heart of all our fights and arguments, at the heart of so many problems in our world and in our own lives, is the inability to act like a child, to realize that our deepest identity is that of a child. We are sons and daughters of our Father who is in heaven, who always watches over us. St. James alludes to that in the reading today when he says, "Where do the wars and where do the battles among you come from? Do they not come from your passions that are within you? You envy, you kill and fight, you wage war. You do not possess because you do not ask." When we stop asking God for the things we need, when we stop relying on Him as a child would on a father, that's when we start fighting each other. That's when life becomes survival of the fittest. There's only so much to go around, and so I have to be the greatest. I have to get it before you do. Our world, suffering from a lack of childlikeness, and in many developed countries, simply from a lack of children, is a broken place. The nightly news this past week thrust a child into our midst. It was the small, lifeless body of a 3-year-old Syrian boy that washed up on a Turkish beach, killed while trying to flee his country with his family. And in some ways, that was just a small example of suffering in the midst of a tidal wave of refugees who are trying to flee a region that's been torn apart by nearly 2 decades of war. But there's something about a child that wakes us up. And indeed, the picture of that child lying on the beach seemed to wake up the conscience of the world. Many countries began to mobilize themselves to deal with this ongoing crisis. Pope Francis asked that every Catholic parish in Europe take in a refugee family. He even opened up the Vatican for that purpose. And that's exactly what Jesus is telling us to do. Whoever receives one such child as this in my name receives me. Children in Jesus' time weren't idolized in the way that we sometimes idolize youth and children. In that time, they were seen as the lowest in society. Children had no rights. They weren't really good for anything until they grew up and were able to work or get married. If you really want to be great, Jesus is saying, then accept the least. Any competition among disciples to be the greatest must only be a competition to be of greatest service to the least among us. A world that doesn't welcome and love children is a world without hope. About 10 years ago, a wonderful movie came out called Children of Men. And it tells about a dystopian future in which a virus has caused global infertility. No one in the world is able to have any more children. The youngest children in the world are nearly grown up, and there are no more babies to replace them. Without a future, the world begins to fall apart. Wars ravage the earth. Famine and suicide and crime become widespread. Millions of refugees roam the land, and they're put into concentration camps to control them. Without children, the world becomes a dark place. then a miracle occurs. A young African girl, a refugee in one of the camps, is found to be with child. And she's a single mother. She has to survive many dangers, but in the end, she gives birth to a new, healthy baby girl in a barn. Just like another miracle baby was born in a barn many centuries ago. And as she brings her child out of the barn and into the camp, the people are so awed by the sight of a child, which they haven't seen in years, that they immediately begin to lay down their weapons, and they begin to weep. In the presence of a child, the world has hope again.